Well, Paul, thank you for your time. I know you're gearing up for a obviously big week with this case. So, just tell me initially, we'll kind of backtrack a long ways real quick if you don't mind. Just telling me your involvement, how did it all start? What about this case kept you up at night, for lack of better terms, trying to find justice for these women and these families involved?
Yeah, it kept me up at nights for many years. I actually got involved in this case back in 1994. I was a fledgling deputy sheriff criminalist down with the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office and was at that point in my career just fascinated with cold cases and serial predator cases. And I ran across some files that were tucked away in a cabinet, just an old file cabinet in the crime lab's library. And these files were just labeled with this red EAR, which I just thought was the oddest thing. And it caught my eye, and so I started pulling out one file after another, and was very quickly figuring out that this was related to a series of unsolved rapes, and that the EAR stood for the East Area Rapist. And it was at that point that I decided, well, I want to see if I can make a difference in this case.
Yeah, so talk to me about that. How you started to make a difference, started to get involved, started to interview victims and victim families, and really get kind of from that point to then point B. I'm sure there's other points along the way, but point B being parked outside of D'Angelo's house, wondering if you should go to the front door or not.
Initially when I started looking at this East Area Rapist series, because forensic DNA testing was just coming on board. This is 1994. I thought, well, let me see what I can do with this DNA testing. See if I can figure out who this East Area Rapist was. And at that time, these cases were believed to be past statute of limitations. They had not been associated with any homicides. And so the reality was I was just working this series more out of curiosity. And I knew, because I had talked to some of the original investigators as well as forensic scientists on the case out of the Bay Area, that this was an infamous case. I had no idea how it would evolve. And eventually, through the testing that I did and sort of the early investigation from a DNA perspective, eventually in 2001, I was able to link the Northern California East Area Rapist to the Southern California original Night Stalker cases, which were homicides. And it was at that point in 2001 in which it was like, oh, this case is a big deal. Now we have homicides in which there's no statute of limitations. And then from that point on, I kind of pushed all my resources, my case files, my crime scene photographs, the investigations that I had done at that point down to Southern California, down in particular to Larry Poole at Orange County Sheriff's Office, thinking they've got all these cases in Northern California. It's just a matter of time, and this is going to be solved, and they're going to be the ones that solved it. And 10 years go by almost. It really was around 2011, 2012, where I've promoted up, and I'm sitting in my office, bored out of my mind doing administrative stuff, and I'm looking at the East Area Rapist files that I had always kept with me, and I was like, that is still unsolved. And it was at that point that I decided I'm going to see what I can do. So in addition to still continuing to pursue the forensic side, that's when I got active, really doing the boots on the ground, driving around all over California, investigating this case.
Yeah, and that's really where your relationship with Michelle, right? It kind of took off, and her interest in this case, her writing that article that really just kind of took off, so to speak, and then the book and all this involvement. And I know there was a lot of skepticism on your end of giving her all those case files, because those are the precious documents you've held on to this whole time. But go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, of course, Michelle came into the picture as a result of Larry Poole. She had contacted Larry Poole, and he had approached the task force, those individuals from the various jurisdictions that were also involved in the case, asking, do we want to have an article written by this Michelle McNamara on this case? And we we roundtabled that and decided, yes, we want that attention. It's time to get the public involved in this case, more so than they had been involved in the past. So I ended up getting a call from Michelle. And then, of course, I'm pretty standoffish with her in terms of what I'm working on. And I was scared to divulge too much information. And I recognized that she had a good working knowledge of the case, much more so than other journalists that had approached me up to that point in time. And then eventually I did form a very strong relationship with her. Now, in terms of case files, I did not give her case files. She ended up procuring case files utilizing her resources. And the reality is I believe that was from some of the retired original investigators, where she was able to negotiate, if you will, getting access to that information.
Got it. Got it. So she got that from Orange County. So
well, there's that whole chapter.
Yeah.
But I think even prior to her obtaining the Orange County records, I believe she had also gotten case files from some of the retired investigators from Sacramento and Contra Costa County.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this case is obviously exponentially large with so many people involved.
Yep.
So yeah, tell me about that moment of linking the EAR to the original Night Stalker, and then now what? You know, we've linked that, but what's next?
Yeah, well, that link, down in Southern California, initially when these cases were happening, those agencies weren't on the same page as to thinking that they were related. In fact, there was a lot of the original investigators in Southern California that were adamant that those cases were not related. So obviously when DNA came on board, they started independently linking those homicides together, while I was working DNA on East Area Rapist cases up in Northern California. And then eventually showed that, yes, what's these 50 cases up in Northern California by the East Area Rapist, it's the same guy that committed those 10 homicides across 6 cases down in Southern California. So that was huge. And I know my perspective is that, well, Southern California, these homicides, they were chasing ghosts, as is typical in a whodunit homicide. They had all sorts of theories, not necessarily thinking that they had a serial predator in the early days that was active at the time. And they are looking at boyfriends of the victims, business partners of some of the men that were killed, etc. Now they have 50 attacks in Northern California in which the victims survived and were able to give a rough description of who their offender was, the statements that he was making, his behaviors at the crime scene. And so my thought is now Southern California homicide investigators know so much more about their offender than what they had up to that point. And there was thousands of suspect names in the Northern California cases that, cross-checking those names against the suspects and the Southern California homicides, there must be a common name in there somewhere. And this is a matter of drilling down, and they're going to solve the case. And so I literally moved into a support capacity, and I was giving Orange County Sheriff's Office everything I had. And then any tips that were coming in, I passed those tips down to Southern California.
Wow. Yeah. And tell me how you got from the moment of, being in your new office, looking at the case files 10 years later, wondering, wow, that's still a cold case, to then the decision of, why don't we test some of this DNA with genealogy websites and companies and see where those matches come from?
Yeah, it really, that was sort of the obvious step in terms of, at that point, I had done everything possible with the DNA testing. It was up in the FBI's CODIS system. It was searching nationwide, looking for other cases as well as an identity of the offender that would be in the CODIS database. Myself, as well as other jurisdictions, had even done Interpol requests to search other countries' DNA databases, as well as in California doing what's called a familial search, looking for a close paternal relative, like a son, a father, a brother of the East Area Rapist, to see is somebody was arrested in his family. And then we could backtrack from there to identify him. And we kept striking out. So in genealogy, and the DNA testing and genealogy came on board, it was sort of the obvious thing to kind of pursue. But there were complications to that, is that these genealogy testing laboratories aren't set up to test forensic type of samples where you have limited sample that's in poor quality. They're used to getting huge amounts of saliva, and they typically don't want to work with law enforcement. They're not going to do your testing for you. So initially in 2012, I was doing this other type of genealogy work, this YSTRs, looking for paternal relatives based on the East Area Rapist YSTR profile. And that I continued to do up until I discovered Barbara Ray Venter, who is doing this new type of DNA testing, genealogy. And it's very different than just submitting a sample to Ancestry.com and getting a list of potential cousins. It's called DNA segment triangulation. And it requires people who have an understanding on how DNA fragments are inherited through the generations, coupled with the genealogy research that's needed in order to be able to identify a common ancestor from people who are in the database that are related by DNA to the offender that you're looking for. And once that methodology was explained to me, because I have a background in forensics and DNA, I recognized the power. And then all my resources, with the assistance of an individual by the name of Steve Kramer from the FBI, that's where we focused our energies. And ultimately, that's what paid off.
Tell me about that moment of, figuring out who this person is. We now know he's pled guilty to the charges against him. So tell me about that moment of getting the name, getting the match, getting that clarification that you've been waiting so many years for.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the way that the genealogy process works, at least in the Golden State Killer case, as this case became known as, it's not, here's the match typically. We didn't get that. We built huge family trees looking for males that fit certain criteria, a certain age, had certain physical characteristics, as well as the geographic profile of being in California during the time of these attacks and in certain jurisdictions. And so we actually, winnowed this huge family tree down to a handful of males that were kind of fitting that profile. But these names come in at different times. It took us months to build these family trees. So as these male names were coming down that fit the characteristics, we kind of start looking at them a little bit. And then go, no, I can eliminate them because this, and this. And so when D'Angelo's name popped up, it was just another name. And the reality is I will tell you, and this is going to be somewhat anticlimactic, when Monica Tchaikovsky from Zach DA's office is the one that found him in the family tree, she sends the email out, and I'm looking at this guy in an Auburn, uniform, a police department uniform. I'm going, I don't know, I'm having a hard time seeing a full-time law enforcement officer having the freedom to be able to do not only all the attacks we know of, but all the surveillance and all the burglaries and everything he did all over Northern California. But he obviously had some aspects that were interesting. But initially, I'm not really feeling D'Angelo. But then we had eliminated everybody else, and I was like, well, I got to start digging into this D'Angelo. And that's when I reached out to his ex-fiancée, Bonnie, left her a voicemail, and I'm going to be retiring in a few days. So I'm now really trying to shake this tree, so to speak, to find out as much about this D'Angelo as possible. And, in the newspaper articles from back in the 70s, he had been fired from the Auburn Police Department for shoplifting, dog repellent, and a hammer. I was like, well, that's goofy. And the police chief that fired him, Nick Willett, was still alive. So I called Chief Willett up, and I spoke with him, and he didn't know what case I was talking about. And I just asked him, do you remember a Joe D'Angelo? And then he definitely did, and he starts telling me about D'Angelo, and then tells me something very, very key, is that when D'Angelo was on admin leave, and is going through the termination process. The chief was home in his bed when his daughter comes into his room in the middle of the night and says, "Daddy, there's a man shining a flashlight into my bedroom window." And the chief told me, "I'm absolutely sure that's D'Angelo." And it was at that point, it was like, that is what the Golden State Killer would do to an employer that was about to terminate him. And that's when my kind of switch flipped about D'Angelo, going, okay, now he's more interesting to me. But I still wasn't convinced. But I was, my last day, full day at work before I was retiring. It's like, I got to go figure out this D'Angelo. And that's when I drove up to his house and parked in front of his house, trying to just assess him. You know, where is he living? What kind of cars is he driving? Do I see him out puttering around in the yard, etc.? And as I'm sitting there, that's when, you know, the thought is going through my mind. It's like, well, I'm retiring. Maybe I should just close this D'Angelo out, go knock on his front door, introduce myself, say, hey, your name has come up in this investigation. I know you're not involved, but you could really help us out by giving us a DNA sample, you know, something along those lines. But as I thought about it, and I thought about what I knew about him and what I didn't know about him, I was like, you know, there's just enough here that I need to be careful. I don't want to blow this guy, blow the cover that we're looking at him. And I decided at that point, you know what, I'm not going to go and knock on his door. And so that was the last thing I did before I retired. And I drove home, and the next day I'm turning in my gun, my credentials, etc. And, you know, walking out of my office with a little cardboard box, you know, with, you know, a spoon, a fork, and a bowl in it or something like that.
Wow. Yeah, I know that moment when I read that in so many articles, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, coming face to face with a man you've been searching for years has just got to be such a trip.
Well, you know, at the time, and it's funny because I've had some people liken it to, you know, the moment in Silence of the Lamb where Jodie Foster's character goes into Buffalo Bill's house, you know, and and it wasn't like that at all. I'm literally just sitting in my car across the street, just kind of wondering about him. And I originally told that story saying I wanted to solve this case before I retired. I didn't do that, but at least I got to within 50 feet of the guy I was looking for before I retired. So I took some satisfaction in that. But obviously, in hindsight, you know, if I had gone up to that front door, I recognize that could have been a very bad situation for me.
Yeah, we have no idea what he would have done or what he would have done after the fact, you know?
You know, what he could have done to me, or, you know, done to his daughter who was living with him, or, you know, done to himself. Right. You know, now that he knows law enforcement is so close, you know, he would be a desperate guy, and who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, wow. Now, I want to talk to you because I feel like you can give me some insight into this. So, this whole act he's playing in court, in the hearings, barely able to speak, in a wheelchair. I mean, you and other investigators observed him on a motorcycle, lifting heavy objects into, you know, on the yard, like, and that was just a couple years ago. So, do you believe he's putting an act on?
Well, I know he's putting an act on because I'm getting information related to his activities while he's been in custody. And I can't speak freely about that. I think that's best coming from Sacramento Sheriff's Office.
Okay, got it. Now, obviously these crimes, we knew the baseline of them, what happened to these people, and the ones who survived, and I just can't even imagine, you know, and someone I really got close with during our time here covering this is Jennifer Carroll and her parents, you know, Lyman and Charlene. And so anyways, when they were describing, you know, that specific murder and the log he used, we knew these details were brutal and horrible, but hearing a DA go over and over and over again of what this man did to her parents and other people, I mean, just tell me from your perspective, like, this may have a lot of fanfare around this case because of how, you know, infamous it is, but this is like bad. Like, what he did is like, people would describe him as the devil, you know? It's truly tragic.
The you know, of course, those of us that have worked this case, you know, we saw firsthand, you know, what he did to his victims. You know, and the homicide victims, the family members, the last thing they should ever see is what he did to their loved ones. This to think about, you know, you have, whether it be a lone woman bound in bed, or a couple laying together in bed, and to be killed the way they were killed, it does show just a level of brutality. I've worked, you know, I was, you know, within law enforcement for a quarter century, and I worked a lot of brutal crimes. But the brazenness of his crimes, and the type of attack that he did, you know, these people were bludgeoned to death, you know, and with the couples, you know, you have one that is having to listen to their loved one being bludgeoned next to him. This is a horrific type of crime. And then, you know, and this was after, you know, the entire series up in Northern California, where he's, you know, attacking single women or couples and sexually assaulting the women. You know, over 50 cases in Northern California. And those came after, you know, the homicide of Claude Snelling down in Visalia, where he's trying to abduct this guy's teenage daughter, and this dad is coming to his daughter's rescue and gets killed. This, I think, is an unprecedented predator that is showing just such a horrific series of crimes against, you know, humanity within California. You know, Michelle coined the term Golden State Killer, and I remember, you know, arguing with her, we don't need another moniker for this guy. But she was right. You know, that moniker really captures what D'Angelo did in California.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I feel like I can talk to you for hours about this case. I'm so fascinated with it. And I know you are probably still. And I think if you will offer any insight into this, I'm just curious why you think he stopped, or did he? You know, was it truly marrying and having a daughter, and or old age, or there's so many theories, but or
Right.
is it possible he never really? I mean, we don't know any murders now that we could link to him, but you know, like I'm just curious what that gap was of really just the silence after decades of terror.
Yeah, you know, I think, and this right now is based on what we know he's done and what he's pled guilty to and admitted to. Is there a possibility there's other cases out there? I think that possibility exists, but can't say for sure. At this point in time, you know, when you take a look at his series, he up in Sacramento, when he became the East Area Rapist, he already had a complete criminal career before that as the Visalia ransacker, and most likely as the Cordova cat burglar in '73 that Sergeant Ken Clark from Sac Sheriff's Office discovered. And he probably has crimes that occurred before then, whether it be in the military or even as a teenage boy. So he's been a predator for years before he even started as the East Area Rapist. So when we start the original Night Stalker series, and it was from, you know, '79 in Southern California, and then we have a 5-year gap that we don't know. He's now in his mid-30s, and then when he Janelle Cruz in 1986, I believe he's 40 or 41. He is, as a predator, is getting older. Crimes that he's committing are very physically demanding. I mean, he's being chased up in Sacramento, he's having to hop fences, you know. As a 41-year-old man, probably slowing down. Now, I do think, you know, my theory is that in '81, you know, he attacked and killed Sherry Domingo and Greg Sanchez. And in that particular, Greg Sanchez, I think, hears him come in and is up and about. D'Angelo ends up having to get into a physical fight with 6'3" Gregory Sanchez. And I he recognized that he possibly could have lost that physical. And it appears, based on my reconstruction of that case, that he's somewhat panicked as he's leaving that scene. He's literally tossing all this binding material that he had brought with him as he's running out the house. And I don't know what that panic was. I think it's possible that he had decided at that point, I'm done. You know, this guy could have killed me, could have hurt me. D'Angelo may have been hurt in that battle. But for whatever reason, 5 years later, he runs across 19-year-old Janelle Cruz, a beautiful young woman, and he ends up sexually assaulting her. And nothing after that. That's sort of, until I have more, I just think that he kind of was just like Dennis Rader and BTK. He recognized that he was getting older and recognized that he could not continue to do these types of crimes without great risk to himself, and that he stopped. Though I guarantee he fantasized about what he did. He's still fantasizing about what he did to this day.
Yeah, and tell me about that. You have been breaking up a little bit within the last 2 minutes on this call for some reason, so I don't really know.
Oh, you're frozen.
I'm frozen now. Oh no.
Yes.
You want to do a quick restart?
I don't know if we should. I just have a couple more questions, Paul, and then I'm done. But I'm hoping if we just maybe let it be for a second. Is that better?
Yep. Now you're starting to move back.
Okay, maybe it just was overloaded. Someone's listening to this call, I'm sure, and they're like, "Ooh, this is interesting." Oh, now you're gone. Let's see. I don't know. What do you think we should do? And I don't know if it's on our end or on your end, Paul. So we're trying to figure out what we should.
Yeah.
So jumping off of what you just said about him, obviously taking a break from this terror, but still fantasizing about it. You mentioned several times of walking into his house after he was arrested, and seeing, the things that were being taken out of there. And really a typical thing he would do, according to you all, is put, a towel over a TV or a monitor to have this glow as he was doing the crimes he was doing. So you witnessed that. Tell me what was so eerie about that moment for you.
Yeah,
What's going on?
the Sac Sheriff's Office and the FBI's evidence response team were processing D'Angelo's house for evidence.
Paul, I'm so sorry. It's cutting out again. Dang it.
No.
You were so good.
And usually this, I do my podcast from here, and this connection is usually rock solid.
So I wonder, because we're not on our end, we're not connected to the Wi-Fi, so I wonder if it's this device. It might need to go onto our Wi-Fi system.
Okay.
But now you look clear.
Yeah,
So
I'm just going over a landline, so I'm pretty good from that.
Yeah. I don't know. Yvonne's coming back. We might connect to a personal hotspot or something, real quick. I don't know. It was solid for a really long time and then just cut off. So
I'm in no rush.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. But I want to talk about the glow on the monitor, and then I'd love to know if there's something about this case that you may never get an answer about that you would love to know, whether it's how quickly he got away. I know they've been exploring that a lot in the HBO series, obviously, with the whole waterways and how was he able to maneuver and never get caught. So I just kind of want to know also your theory on that, and then if there's anything specific that you just would like us to know about the end of this this case. Really, it's coming to a close real soon. I know it will never be over for the victims and their families, but clearly getting that justice is going to be so important, and it's just such a bummer and so sad that Michelle won't witness that. And I think if you want to talk about that, but those are my questions, and then we're done. So hopefully this stays.
Now, how long have you been working up there in Sacramento?
2.5 years. Yeah.
Where'd you come from?
I was in Tennessee prior, Knoxville.
They're doing news stuff out there?
Yeah, and then prior to that I was in Reading. But I will I will stay in touch with you because I'm actually starting a cold case series here at ABC 10. We're
cool.
going to start looking into cold cases. So,
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we're getting
Yeah,
close.
you're much clearer and moving around.
Okay, good. Yeah, it looks like we're almost ready on our end because we're connecting to a hotspot. So we should be good to go once it connects. Thank you, Yvonne. I think it's that green icon right there. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. All right, we should be good. So let's go back to the glow on the monitor part where you were, talking about how he's still fantasizing, and you witnessed that, which obviously struck a chord with you. So yeah, tell me about that moment.
So, when I initially went into Diego's house after his arrest, the Sacramento Sheriff's Office and the FBI's evidence response team were responsible for processing that location for evidence. But prior to them starting the processing, they allowed those of us that had been so invested in this case to do a walkthrough with the intention, if there was anything we noticed that we thought were the investigation, to point that out to make sure that was documented and collected. And so myself, as a small group of the FBI agents I had been working with, went through the house back to D'Angelo's bedroom and walked in there. As I'm taking the bedroom in, I notice as I go through his front door, just right to the right is his desk. It's just a small little desk that has a computer on it, and he has a flat screen monitor. And the thing that stood out to me was that he had a towel draped over the front of the monitor. Huge to me because I was so familiar with the cases, the rapist and what he was doing, that I recognized exactly what he is doing there. It wasn't a dust cover. What he used to do when he was attacking couples, he would separate the woman out from the bedroom and place her in the family room, kept the male in the bedroom on the bed bound up, and he often turned the TV on and then keep the sound off and drape a towel or similar type object over the front of the TV so he'd have that soft glow in the family room. He's assaulting the woman. He wanted to see her fear. And so now I'm looking at him replicating that type of environment in his own bedroom. That is an ongoing fantasy where I'm sure he would turn off all the lights, middle of the night, have that computer monitor on with the towel, and then start reliving his attacks on these women.
Wow. That is to say the least, disturbing image. Just to, think about. And I know there's got to be so much about, like, we obviously, we as journalists still don't know a lot. You know much more than me, clearly. But just for yourself, having all this knowledge in this case, what about this situation, knowing it's now D'Angelo, is there something that you're still just like, I need an answer to this, or I'd love an answer? You may never get it, but what does keep you now? What keeps you up now?
There really is so much. In many ways, D'Angelo, to this day, is a little bit of a mystery man. We've got some answers. We know why, he's got the Sacramento connections. We know what he's doing up in Auburn, and there is some understanding of down in Southern California, but there's still a lot of holes. I know from my perspective, I want answers to everything, and we all do. It's selection. All these victims want to know why them. Where did he initially see them? And I've always described his victim selection multimodal. He wasn't just selecting victims one way. I believe that some of these women, back after seeing them out and about, maybe at the mall or the grocery store or wherever, and followed them back home. I also believe that he's burglarizing a certain neighborhood and ends up running across somebody that he decides fits what he wants as a victim. I also believe that he's choosing these couples based on who the man is. He's had a prior interaction with this man and is deciding, I'm going to come back and show you who I am. But I want answers to that. And I think that's probably the number one thing I want to know is victim selection, but then his tactics. There are select cases where he had inner knowledge of what was going on inside that house with that family for that evening of the attack. How is that information? And I know I was playing around the idea that he is surveilling these homes, not only just visually, but also potentially listening in what's going on inside these houses. And it turns out, people back in the 70s, they did have those cordless, phones in their houses that were not encrypted. And all you had to do is take one of those old style FM radios and tune it past 108, and you could listen in to all these phone calls going in with whatever was within the reception range. This becomes significant as a potential real theory is that when he's attacking down in Santa Barbara, there is a case that's not attributed to him. It's just an unknown case where a young girl has a man trying to get into her window and alerts dad, and dad ends up, coming out, and the guy's gone. But on the front curb in front of that house is a hatchet and an FM radio. Was that potentially D'Angelo listening in to the cordless phones? It's just a theory. It's speculation at this point. Only he knows what he was doing. But I want answers to that. There's so many, in each case, we could come up with a series of questions that we want answers to. Why did you say this? Or why did you do this in this particular case? But until he decides that he wants to provide those details, all we can do is guess and speculate.
Yeah, I was just about to and do you think, and I know it's a show, so forgive me, but do you think like in the show Mindhunter, you'll go visit him in prison, whichever prison he ends up at, and ask him these questions? Do you think he would ever talk to you?
Well, first, I don't know if he ever would talk to me or not. I've had one person describe me as his nemesis. He may not like me very much, but I most certainly would take advantage of the opportunity to sit down with him and have a conversation about his crimes and try to get these questions answered. Because at this point, in many ways, we can never excuse what he's done. He's committed these atrocities. But if he wants to do any good with the remaining part of his life, it is to come forward and talk, for us to be able to learn about how he committed these crimes, how he selected these victims, the tactics he's used, because that helps us get a better understanding of this type of predator to apply to other cases, to try to prevent other victims in these other cases. And so that's almost my plea to him, is come forward and do that. You will never erase what you've done before, but you most certainly can provide some information that can at least have a positive meaning moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure so many of these families have a list of a million questions for him,
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. And speaking of that, because clearly he's the only one that knows, but we did do at our station a couple years ago a pretty extensive investigation into the Oscar Clifton case in Visalia in 1975. And, he was framed, and Tulare County came forward and said there's no way they believe that D'Angelo's linked to this murder of Donna Richmond. But do you have any take on that? You did say there is maybe a possibility he has committed more crimes that we don't know of.
I think the only comment I can make to that is I have talked to the Tulare County DA. I've heard some of the details. At this point in time, I don't think that there needs to be any further investigation into D'Angelo's involvement, but any of the details needs to come out of Tulare County.
Got it. Now, this upcoming sentencing, I know there's details you can't divulge, but for you to have this case closed fully, him sentenced to all those different counts for life in prison without parole, and obviously other things attached to that, to know that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, how does that sit with you? What is this day gonna mean for you?
I think this day is really for the victims. For me, the day was when he was taken into custody, because at that point in time, I knew who he was. I knew he was the Golden State Killer, and that he wasn't ever going to, get out of custody ever again. And it was at that point where I knew that I had accomplished what I set out to do. So going through the court process now, for me is to support the victims, because this is what they need. This is where justice is actually being served.
Yeah, I know. And you, obviously, I saw pictures of you with Carol Daly and Bonnie and all these other, survivors and daughters of these victims. I know you all have created such a community around this and support. And if you could just maybe tell me how that has helped in all this, and then just the sadness that comes around the fact that some people have never gotten the opportunity to see this case closed because they've passed away before this happened.
Well, and I think, most certainly when you take a look at, somebody like Jane Carson, she has been such a rock for the other survivors in this case, both those who were personally attacked as well as those who lost their loved ones in the homicide cases. And to watch them interact and talk about their experiences and where we're at today and what that means to them was so rewarding. And that's, I think, only going to mean so much more, once this is all said and done. And then, the sadness is there are victims that have passed away that never found out, who their attacker was. That I remember, finding out those who I would refer to as victim number 8, up there in Sacramento of the East Area Rapist. And I was wanting to talk to her, and then I discovered that she had died, and had died at a relatively young age. And it was so sad. But, I think it also comes to now we get to like Michelle McNamara, who I developed a very close relationship with. And, to know that she didn't experience, the discovery of who the Golden State Killer was, that's kind of tough to take, But I remember, before the case was solved, and I'm driving around, and I had just eliminated my last prime suspect, and I was frustrated, and I'm just like, talking to Michelle, and I said, Michelle, I know you now know, who this guy is. Send me a signal. So I know that she knows. But it's still sad that she didn't get to experience, getting that answer while she was still alive.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and this is a case that's setting the precedent for so many other cases, like the Zodiac Killer case. Looking into the genealogy involved in that. All these other cold cases that it really proves to show that resilience and staying with it proves to be successful. And I just applaud you all. I'm obviously a journalist, but I'm also a true crime geek, and I think this case is fascinating for so many reasons. And I think it just again sets a precedent moving forward for all these cold cases that remain unsolved.
Well, and I think it's so important, for people to understand, especially with the HBO series out now, and I love Michelle, and she most certainly brought a lot of public attention to this case. But there were, multiple investigators, as well as your DA, Anne Marie Schubert, who over decades have been committed to solving this case. And we were working it before Michelle got involved. We worked it while Michelle was involved, and we continued to work it after Michelle passed away. And these individuals, their persistence is something that needs to be noted, because this was not a case, starting basically when we formed the task force, right in around that 2011, 2012 timeframe, we were on it, and it was being worked across the state. And I believe, even if Michelle never got involved and the public never got the exposure to the case that Michelle brought it, we would be still here to this day because of the commitment of individuals like DA Anne Marie Schubert, Sergeant Ken Clark, Detective Larry Poole, or Detective Erica Hutchcraft down in Southern California. They all were passionate about this case, and it is that persistence. And it was we just kept trying, we just kept trying and failing, and then eventually, I was fortunate to kind of stumble across, the way to get the answer.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, honestly. Well, I really, really appreciate your time. Is there anything you would like to talk? I mean, we talked about a lot, but if is there anything I forgot to ask that you think is super pertinent to this case and also moving forward in your involvement?
There's so much to this case.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, what, because there's just so much. And I know, at the plea hearing, the public probably heard some details for the first time that they've never heard of as to what he was doing to some of these victims. And quite frankly, those details are just scratching the surface in each case. There's so much more to what he was doing and what was going on in this investigation. We're fortunate to be where we're at this point in time. And, it really is just going to be a moment for me to just kind of be able to, sit back and I don't know what the right term is. It isn't enjoy. It's more of just, there's a conclusion.